Alright, so today we're going to bring you the story of our bus door. This door has been just by far the hardest and most emotionally taxing part of the bus. So when we first bought the bus, it was sitting in a parking lot in Apache Junction. And the guy who was there to show us the bus went to go unlock it, and when he went to unlock it, he had to kind of shake the door a little bit to get the lock to undo, and we thought, oh, something's not exactly right. And so we looked at it, and you could see that it was kind of cockeyed, that it wasn't exactly right. And so we were like, yeah, the door's a little crooked. Surely there's a body shop that is able to fix this kind of thing. Unfortunately, it was kind of a problem because the door didn't really latch, and so it would come open. Like when we drove it a couple times, it would fly open. And so we thought, oh, this really should be addressed, and it needs to be addressed pretty quickly. So the first thing we did is we took it to a paint shop. So a paint shop that specializes in painting buses. And the guy came out and was super nice and looked it over for us and said, we charge $90 an hour just to do anything we need to do. He goes, so why don't you take it home, undo all the screws, undo all the stuff that surrounds it, and then you can bring it back in and we'll have a more appropriate view. Well, I did that, and I took a bunch of pictures, and I called, and he said, you know, we don't really do body work like that. We actually usually outsource that stuff to this other company. So here's their number, here's my contact there, call them. And so I did. I sent him a ton of pictures, probably 30 pictures we uploaded to Dropbox, and sent a bunch of links and said, hey, this guy from this place said he uses you guys all the time to call you, and this is what our door looks like. And they literally responded like a day later and said, we're not going to touch it. So we're like, oh no. And so then we're like, okay, what are we going to do next? And so we called probably 5 or 6 different coach places, and the answers were all over the place. People were like, no, we won't touch it, that's way too old. All the way to one guy was like, look, I don't know anything about that door, but I can rebuild you a whole new door for $10,000. So here we are thinking, well, we just paid $12,000 for the bus. We're not about to go pay $10,000 just for the door that's just kind of wonky. So anyway, that started our foray into how are we going to get this thing fixed? And so we kept calling, and finally one guy out in West Phoenix, and he said, you know what, I can't tell you. He goes, those are nice pictures, but I can't tell unless I see it and I move it and all that stuff what I can do for you. And so we drove it all the way out there, and that was our first real longish trip, because we bought the thing in about 20 minutes from our house. So that was the first trip we'd taken that was longer than like an hour. So we drove it all the way out there, and at this point I'd removed all the gauges because I was working on the gauges, so I had no idea how fast I was going or the RPMs or anything like that. But we drove it all the way out there, and we get it out there, and the guy starts looking at it, and you could kind of tell that things were bad because he started looking at it sideways. And so as he's looking at it sideways, Michelle whispers in my ear, and she says, there's no way this guy is going to work on it. Just look at the way he's looking at the door. And he was literally like looking at it sideways. So we're like, oh no. And so the guy says he finally he's moving it around and adjusting it and trying to see how the hinges are and stuff. And he finally looks at me and he goes, I can't fix that door. And I was like, what do you mean? You're like a body shop here. And he goes, yeah. He goes, we could work on that door for 2 weeks, and it could actually be worse than when you first brought it in here. And I was like, oh no. He goes, you know what the best thing to do is? He goes, try to find another door that's like that, kind of as a donor door with the hinges and everything. So try to find a door, and what we can do, he said, is if we have both doors, we can kind of finagle both doors, and if we have one that's straighter than this one, then we can kind of make it work. And so the task was, okay, now let's find another door. So I looked and looked and looked, and of course you can't find another door. It's like a 55-year-old bus. So anyway, we looked and looked and looked, And I finally, out of desperation, I posted online, and I'm like, I know this is a long shot. Does anybody know where I can source a door from a PD4106? Mine's a 1964, if that matters. Because I think the doors were all pretty much the same. And to my surprise, one guy says, hey, you'll never guess what, but I have an old door. I have an old door, and it's never even been mounted. He goes, it's literally brand new. And I'm thinking to myself, no way. There's like no way. It's like the impossible find, right? A new old stock door from a 1960s bus. So I was elated. We were like, what can I do to make sure that that door gets here? Michelle and I are elated. We're like, I can't believe we actually found a door from a PD4106. So anyway, we try to make arrangements to get it down here. And so around this time, there's this big bus convention in, I believe it's Indiana. And so he says, you know what? I have a guy who's going down there, who's in a scenic cruiser. He said, I can actually just throw it in his bay, and he can bring it down. You can meet him somewhere on his way back to LA, because this guy was from LA. And he said, you can meet him down there, and he's like on his way back, he can just swing by and drop the door off. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle, because I was always told that these doors weigh about 300 pounds. And I was like, how are we gonna ship that? Because where I found it was in Pennsylvania. And so I was like, how are we ever gonna ship a 300-pound door that's gonna cost like $1,200? I just finished shipping a battery, or our tanks. Actually, our tanks cost, I think, $300 or $400 to ship here. And so we're like, there's no way. And so anyway, he says, all right, so that's like 2 months away. And we're like, all right, we can wait the 2 months. We've been searching for this door now for like 6 or 7 months. We're like, we can wait another 2 months. So anyway, the 2 months comes, and that guy ends up getting sick and can't make it. So I'm like, oh no, now I'm back to square one. But he says, you know what, don't worry, we will just ship it. And I was like, oh great, now I'm gonna have to pay a bunch of shipping fees for this door. But I was like, you know what, it doesn't matter, because it's the right door and we're gonna get it here. All right, so the guy ships it out, and he ships it out on an airplane. It's literally like on a Southwest Cargo. And I'm thinking, how expensive is that to ship a 300-pound door via cargo on an airplane? So I was like, oh my god, it's gonna cost me a fortune. Anyway, I drive down there, and I'm like, well, first of all, how am I gonna load it into the truck? And then how am I gonna unload it? So I drive down there, I pick it up, everything's fine. The funny thing is, I see the door, and you can kind of see from the outline that it's the door. It's about the right size, and it's all wrapped in cardboard, and it's just kind of leaning up against the wall. And I'm like, are they going to get a forklift, or how are they going to be able to move that door? And I watch a guy literally go over there, and he picks it up over his head, and he's like, I'm like, this has got to be the strongest guy in the world. He just lifted a 300-pound door over his head and is taking it out to the truck. Well, it turns out the door only weighs about 50 pounds. So that was our first miscalculation, is the door is actually, I think it was 49 pounds with the cardboard and everything. So that was our first kind of introduction into we don't know very much. So anyway, we get it into the car, and of course it's easy to unload because it only weighs 40 pounds or 50 pounds. So that was a non-issue. But we get it set up, and we are ecstatic. I mean, we open it up, and we're half expecting like, oh, it's not, maybe it's just some weird thing, maybe it's not the right thing. But we open it up, and we're like, man, it looks right. It's the right shape. It's perfectly straight. It's got the green, like this green stuff that they put on there so that it would be easier to paint. So it's never even been painted. There's not a single dent. It's perfect. We're like, oh my gosh, we're actually gonna reach the end of this. We've got a brand new door. And so we go, and I'm starting to kind of measure it up and see how I can transfer the hinges, and because there's not even holes for the hinges. You kind of have to make those on your own. So I'm trying to see like, okay, how can I do that? And I start measuring it and start measuring everything out. And lo and behold, the door is about 6 inches short. So it's literally 6 inches shorter than the door we have on there, and I'm thinking, how can that be? It's the exact shape. It's the window hole is exactly the same size. Everything is exactly right, but it's just 6 inches too short. So we're like, how can that be? And so we start looking it up and start researching and seeing what all the different, and we have friends now who have other models of buses. And so I ask a couple of friends, can you measure your front door? How tall is it? And sure enough, the bus model that's the very next one, the Buffalo, so we have a 4106, and the other door is off of a 4108, is that right? So anyway, I'll get those numbers correct, but turns out that the door on the Buffalo is 6 inches shorter. It's the exact same width, it's the exact same shape, the window hole is exactly the same. The only difference is it's 6 inches shorter, and that's what the door was from. So we're like, oh no, back to square one, we're gonna have to deal with this door. Alright, so now we had resorted to, this is the door we have, and we're gonna have to make it work. And so what were the real problems? So the first major problem is that the hardware that was used to secure the door was basically household hardware. So it was just a regular household handle, even with the little scrolly Q thing, and that has like a strike plate, which was all bent up. That was another issue. But it also, just the thing that latches it is this tiny little thing that sticks out. Everyone's seen their front door, and everyone's seen the little piece that holds it. You know, it's just that little thing that slides out, and then it kind of catches on the strike plate, and that's what holds it shut. Well, in a bus that's moving and kind of torquing and things like that, that doesn't hold it shut, it turns out, because we shut that, and then the door and the lock wouldn't line up right sometimes either, so it was hard to put the deadbolt on. So the deadbolt wouldn't work half the time either, unless we would shimmy it and work it just the right way. But even with those, I had the deadbolt in and I had the door shut as we were driving to that body shop in Phoenix, and lo and behold, we're on the freeway and the door flies open. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I'm like trying to work the handle and trying to like get it shut, and I'm, you know, I kind of stressed out a little bit. So I got it shut enough to where it was just, you know, kind of against the body, and I pulled over, and you know, in my panic, I was pushing on the handle, and what I realized was that the handle actually goes past where you think it would go, and it kind of snaps into place, and that actually holds the door shut. So I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so this is our handle, and it will actually, it goes to there, and that's shut, and that's where I always would have it. But if you go just a little bit more, it kind of locks into place. We didn't actually know that. So as we were traveling down the freeway, we had it just kind of in the loose position. So when we have it like this, it locks it in place and it doesn't open at all. Okay, so now we'd figured out how we can secure it and shut it while we're driving so it doesn't continually fly open. But there was still an issue with the ceiling, because the door is not just kind of cockeyed in the frame. It's cockeyed in the frame for sure, but it's also kind of corkscrewed. It's also kind of, the outside sticks out way more than the inside, and we think it's because at some point someone probably stuck a crowbar in there and pried against the side of the bus. Because those household latches are pretty easy to defeat, I think someone was like, look, I'm just gonna break my way in, and had tried, and maybe did, I don't know. The problem was with this corkscrew door is it didn't really seal anywhere. In fact, there was just, the way they had sealed it is there was pieces of rubber and pieces of even like tennis shoe that were screwed in to try to get the door to kind of position itself in the right way. And so there was all these like hacks and just where the screws had stripped out. And so we had called Luke at US Coach, which if you have an old bus like this, you know who Luke is. So Luke is always a pleasure to talk to. I've talked to him several times and been like, I don't know what this is, or I don't know how this works, and he's always there, and he knows what everything is. And so I explained a little bit about our front door and said, look, we can't get anybody to help us, and it doesn't seal, and we need new whatever makes it seal. And he's like, oh, I got you covered. He goes, they still make those, and I have them in stock. And so I did. I bought a whole set of new door seals. And I said, you know, what can I do to straighten out this door so that I can at least get something to latch? And he said, he goes, you could take it to an expensive body shop or whatever. But he says, he went into a story and he says, back in 1962, when I was touring the factory at GM, he said, when I saw the brand new buses come off the assembly line, he goes, you know what they would do when the door was slightly cockeyed? He goes, they would take a 2x4, and he goes, and they'd wedge it into the top, and he goes, one guy would just take his shoulder and just basically manhandle the door until it was aligned. And he's like, you might want to try that. And so we did. We got a big piece of 2x4 or 2x6 or something and wedged in there, and to our surprise, it did fold back, and it came back, and it was probably 50 to 75% better after we did that. So it was starting to line up. And so we started to line it up, and it started to fold into place correctly. And then we started noticing that at the bottom of the door, the hinges had been messed with. And so what we did was we took the whole hinge assembly apart and redid all the hardware, and then mounted it up as straight as we could possibly get it, and tried to line everything back up. So it lined up a lot better after we did that. So we repainted everything, and you can obviously tell from this is only supposed to have, I think, 4 holes in it, but you can clearly see 8 there. So somebody had already done that. So we went in and tried to redo a lot of the hinge, and it helped out a ton, and it helped the door actually functions much smoother now. So he did send us all the rubber pieces, and so we got to doing the front of the rubber. All right, so 50 to 70% better. What does that mean exactly? So what that really means to us is that this actually lines up now. So this part where we're actually going to put a latch in and we're actually going to secure the door actually lines up. Down here, we've still got probably half an inch or so that it sticks out, and that's, at this point, we've just kind of accepted that that's the way it's going to be. We're going to try to seal it to the best of our ability, but that's just the way it's going to be. So we've lined it up, we've redone the hinges, and it's better. It's a lot better, but it still wasn't sealing. And so